In the stillness of dawn, as the sun began to stretch its golden fingers across the sleepy town of Elmwood, a low rumble broke the tranquility. Far from the bustling streets, past the quaint little homes, there lay a sprawling farm, Barnaby's acres. On the surface, it seemed ordinary, but hidden behind its rustic charm was a secret that could tempt even the most cautious souls. The farmer, old man Barnaby, was no stranger to the rough edges of life. A man with a sun-kissed face, furrowed by years of hard work, he had spent decades tending to his land. But there was one thing he loved more than his crops: the rare and valuable livestock he had painstakingly bred. He treated each animal almost like a member of his family, and those who knew him could feel the depth of that bond. But not everyone admired Barnaby's devotion. The word on the streets moved like wildfire. A trio of outlaws, notorious in their own right, got wind of the farmer's prized possessions. They called themselves the Lost Wolves, a fitting name, for they operated in the shadows, snatching anything they deemed valuable. They saw Barnaby's livestock as an easy score, a ticket to a life far fancier than the one they led. As the Tuesday sun climbed higher, the Lost Wolves gathered in a cramped tavern. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the whispers of greed. Hank, the leader of the pack, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Listen up, boys. Old Barnaby thinks he's untouchable, living in that farm all by his lonesome, but I've heard he's got a stash worth a pretty penny." Jake, the brains of the group, flipped a coin between his fingers, his face wearing an expression of calculation. "But Barnaby is a tough old coot." "Easy enough," Hank retorted, a wicked grin curling at the corners of his mouth. "We just need to distract him." As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in vibrant hues, the Lost Wolves made their way toward Barnaby's acres, hearts pounding with the thrill of the chase. Their plan was deceptively simple: create a ruckus on one side of the farm, drawing Barnaby's attention, while they quietly slipped in and grabbed the prize. Night draped its inky cloak over the land, flickers of stars twinkling like distant jewels. The old farmer, oblivious to the brewing storm, had settled in for the night, dozing off in his favorite armchair, his beloved dog, Rusty, snoring softly at his feet. He had served these fields well, and all he wanted was the peace he so richly deserved. But just beyond that peace, laughter echoed through the trees, cackling and jeering. The Lost Wolves were ready to undertake their heist. With stealthy, practiced movements, they split up, two taking the side nearest the barn where the livestock were kept, and Hank darting toward the farmhouse, plotting to cause the distraction that would set his plan in motion. Silence enveloped the barn, but it wasn't long before the noise erupted. Crates tipped over, a false sense of commotion echoing through the air. Barnaby jolted awake, immediately sensing that something was off. His instincts kicked in, sharper than the knife he crafted from hardened steel. He reached for his lantern, the flickering flame casting an ominous glow over his creased face, and began to make his way to the source of the ruckus. As Hank scrambled through the back entrance of the farmhouse, adrenaline surged through him, a surge reminiscent of a hunt. But this wasn't the first time he'd been reckless. He had earned his stripes in the underbelly of society, made desperate choices. And tonight, greed rang louder than caution. Outside, the two other outlaws moved swiftly, herding the farm animals, eyes gleaming with the prospect of escape. Their boots crunched over dried hay, the animals bleating in confusion, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around them. Just as they were about to make their escape, cries echoed from the farmhouse. Barnaby's voice boomed, a commanding presence lurking within the unyielding timber of the barn wall. The outlaws froze, caught in the act, their hearts racing like wild horses. Old man Barnaby had been waiting for this moment. When he set up his farm, he did more than plant crops, he built defenses. Each animal wasn't just a dollar sign, they were his lifeblood, a testament to years spent in toil. And in that moment, a glimmer of resolve sparked within him. He might be old, but he wasn't without tricks. As the outlaws whispered among themselves, trying to decide their next move, Barnaby made his way quietly toward a trapdoor that led to the basement, a place that held more than just tools. He reached for his hunting rifle, whispering a small prayer for guidance. Rusty stood up, sensing the shift in the air, his loyalty unwavering. Outside, the panicking livestock began to break free, pushing against their pens, pulling against their rope. The world was a teaser, brimmed with possibilities. It was the chaos that gave Barnaby clarity. He pushed down the trapdoor and slipped into the basement, creating a plan of counterattack. Within moments, the lost wolves had decided to bolt when things began going sideways, but they had underestimated their prey. Just as they turned to make their escape, Barnaby emerged from the barn with an unexpected fury, rifle in hand, eyes blazing like two ancient lanterns. The tables had turned. He shouted, a fierce resolve slicing through the night. The outlaws stumbled, momentarily stunned, their plans imploding in front of them. Hank, who had relied on surprise and deception, was now face to face with a farmer who would do whatever it took to protect what was rightfully his. But they weren't ready to back down. Hank gripped his knife tighter, the blade glinting menacingly under the moonlight. Step aside, old man. We're not looking for trouble. Barnaby's heart thrummed beneath his chest, not with fear, but with something much fiercer. This land belongs to me. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine? Rusty growled, sensing the tension in the air. With one swift motion, Barnaby shifted his rifle slightly, the barrel aimed at the ground between the outlaws and himself. You want them? A standoff unfolded under the blanket of the night, stars shivering in their celestial high. The lost wolves couldn't possibly predict this twist. In the eyes of one modest farmer lay a defiance born not from a mere need for wealth, but from love and legacy. The love for each animal that had sprung from the very earth beneath his feet. Barnaby stepped forward, voice steady. If you want to threaten me, then you've chosen the wrong target. The lost wolves could see it in his eyes, the unwavering determination that suggested he would not back down easily. Behind him, the animals were restless, their instincts understanding the stakes. Hank exchanged nervous glances with his partners, hesitating as the weight of the moment settled in the air. They hadn't come here to confront a man like Barnaby. Deep down, they each bore the scars of moral compromise, and the choice before them suddenly felt heavy. Before Hank could muster a response, Rusty lunged forward, barking fiercely. With an unexpected ferocity, he darted toward Hank, teeth bared. In that split second, chaos erupted. The outlaws turned to flee, abandoning their plans, scrambling in every direction. The lost wolves melted into the shadows, the night swallowing them whole. Adrenaline surged through Barnaby as he pushed the rifle back into the crook of his arm, breathing heavily. He had faced danger before, but never like this. The ferocity that had guided him was mixed with relief. Barnaby couldn't help but smile at the loyalty of his faithful companion, a bond forged through years of shared struggles. But it wasn't just the animals he had fought for, it was the life he had built. The beauty of every sunrise over his farm, every seed he had sown, every hand that had helped him, all of it was worth defending. His heart swelled with pride, and in that quiet moment, he realized how often his little piece of the world went unnoticed, sheltered from the chaos of a greed-driven outside. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting majestic light on Barnaby's acres. The livestock grazed peacefully once again, blissfully unaware of the danger they had been in. As he took a deep breath, Barnaby understood something irrevocable. The fight wasn't just for survival, it was for love of the land, infused with the spirit of those who came before him. Old man Barnaby had stood against the storm, and in doing so, he had told a tale vibrant with truths about bravery, loyalty, and the unwavering bonds that tether us to our homes, reminding us all that sometimes the greatest surprises come from the hearts of those we least expect to rise against the odds. The moon hung high, cloaked in clouds, casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. In the distance, the outlines of three figures crept toward the shadowy edges of a farm Barnaby's acres. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic, but that serenity masked a fortune hidden just beneath the surface. Rare livestock that old man Barnaby cared for like family. As the trio approached, their hearts pulsed with excitement, a dangerous rush that overshadowed the consequences. Hank, the leader of the group, paused. His sharp features and a glint in his eye hinted at a man who had danced too long with risk. "This is it," he whispered, his voice low and conspiratorial. Jake asked, his voice shaky. The youngest of the trio, he was filled with doubt, staring at the inviting glow emanating from the farmhouse window. "Please," Nick scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You think an old man can stop us?" Distraction. The word hung in the air like a heavy fog. Hank contemplated their plan, his brain racing through various scenarios while shadows danced in the flickering light from the farmhouse. Barnaby had been lucky until now, living a quiet life that offered little more than hard work and the gentle bleating of sheep, but tonight, their luck would run out. The three outlaws had spent weeks gathering information. They learned his schedule, from his early morning milking routines to late-night strolls around the barn. Barnaby was predictable. That predictability was about to cost him. As the clock struck midnight, they set their plan into motion. Hank opted to make noise. He would create the distraction. While he approached the farmhouse, Jake and Nick slipped toward the barn, stealthy as shadows. The old farmer had become a source of laughter on the streets, a simpleton living a simple life. Hank hoped that would make it easier to pull off their little stunt. The moonlight illuminated the barn's silhouette against the indigo sky. Every creak and groan echoed like a warning, yet the men pressed on, driven by the tantalizing lure of wealth. Nick chuckled nervously. A rifle. Inside the farmhouse, old man Barnaby was finishing his dinner, a hearty stew simmering on the stove. He glanced at the clock, noting the ungodly hour. But tonight, instead of drifting gently to sleep, he felt a familiar chill in the air, a sensation that something wasn't quite right. Rusty, his loyal dog, lay at his feet, ears perked, alerting Barnaby to a shift in their peaceful night. At the same time, outside, Hank was banging on the farmhouse door, hurling insults into the night. "Hey, old man, come out and have a chat." Barnaby furrowed his brow. He hadn't raised a ruckus in years. He took hold of his rifle, a trusty double barrel that had seen more than its fair share of action. With a steady grip, he opened the door a crack, peering out to see the trouble brewing. He demanded, his voice steady despite the tremor of anticipation. Hank's bravado crumbled slightly under the weight of Barnaby's gaze. Though older, there was a fire in the farmer's eyes that made him rethink their approach. "Just a little chat, sir," Hank replied, forcing a chuckle, his palms sweating. Behind him, Jake and Nick took advantage of the distraction. They slipped into the barn, hearts racing as they approached the livestock pens. The animals shifted, their eyes wide, sensing the nerves that soaked the air. Jake asked, his voice cracking as he fumbled with a latch. Nick urged. Back at the farmhouse, Barnaby adjusted his grip on his rifle. He could hear a disturbance from the barn, the low growls of his sheep mixing with the soft thuds of footsteps on hay. Instinct kicked in. He had worked his entire life for this farm, and he wasn't about to let a couple of outlaws ruin it. Before Hank could utter another word, the farmer stepped outside, gun held high, a tether between him and the danger threatening his livelihood. "You best get off my land," he warned, voice calm but steady as steel. Hank's bravado slipped away completely. "Hey now, old man, we just came for a little fun," he stuttered, eyes darting nervously. Barnaby snapped. With swift, practiced movements, the old farmer raised his weapon, aiming toward Hank, the warmth of his home washed away by the rising tide of adrenaline. "You leave my animals alone," he called out, a wave of determination coursing through him. As if on cue, the sound of rattling echoed from the barn. Barnaby's heart raced. The outlaws had slipped through the cracks just as he feared. He turned his gaze back to them, every ounce of his being now fueled by a protective instinct for his farm. This wasn't just a property. It was his heritage, roots entwined deeply with every tree, every field, and every animal he bred. Every sacrifice he made had been for them, and damn it, he wasn't about to let some city-born thieves take away what he had worked so hard for. Jake and Nick emerged from the barn, clutching two of the prized sheep, eyes wide with panic. "We've got to go," Jake shouted, trying to shove past Hank, who still stood frozen at the threshold of the farmhouse. In a moment of clarity, Barnaby realized he needed to act fast. He'd lived long enough to know that confrontation wasn't just about fear. It was about smart tactics. He took a step forward, aiming his rifle into the night air. He roared. As if on cue, Rusty launched himself out from the farmhouse, an embodiment of loyalty and love, barking fiercely, charging straight at Hank. It wasn't just a dog. It was a guardian of the land, the heart of Barnaby's existence. Instinctively, Hank turned and stumbled back against the wall, desperately trying to catch his breath. The tide was changing. In that moment of uncertainty, Barnaby seized his chance, advancing toward the intruders. "Leave my livestock alone," he demanded, his voice rising above the noise of the barking dog and the bleating animals. The conviction in his tone bore an unspoken weight, one that conveyed he meant every word. Faced with a determined farmer, an aggressive dog, and half a dozen startled animals all at once, fear crept into the hearts of the outlaws. This was not the easy pick they had anticipated. They slumped back into the shadows, the spirits of desperation clashing with the collar of bravado they wore. "Okay, we're leaving," Jake stammered, eyes darting as he tugged at Nick's arm, ready to pull him away. Barnaby shouted. Nick's grip tightened on the sheep as he exchanged a glance with Jake. They shared an understanding, a silent pact that enough was enough. With the farmer's resolve unbroken, they knew the tide had undoubtedly turned against them. In a final act of rebellion, Hank shook his head, frustration boiling inside him. Barnaby squared his shoulders, posture filled with the weight of years spent fighting for what was right. "I don't need to scare you. I just need you to understand that this isn't worth it." Hank weighed his options, the burden of each choice echoing in his mind. A man who had spent his life slipping through the cracks, always chasing something more, suddenly found himself humbled by the presence of a man who had known nothing but hard work. They were two sides of the same coin, yet one was rooted in the earth, while the other chased after dreams made of smoke and ash. Jake urged, his voice tremulous, "Let's just go." The fire in Hank's eyes flickered. One last surge of bravado wore thin under the weight of consequence. As he glanced around at the old farmer, his loyal dog, and the animals standing defiantly behind him, something shifted in the air. Hank lowered his knife, biting his lip. None of this felt right anymore. With a heavy heart, he turned to his friends, "Fine." As they slinked back into the shadows, Barnaby lowered his rifle, heart racing, the adrenaline beginning to settle. The air was thick with tension, but the threat that had loomed earlier began to dissipate like the morning fog. "Good," Barnaby called after them, his voice unyielding. "Remember this, boys." And with that, Barnaby turned back toward his farm, body weary yet triumphant. Behind him, Rusty pranced beside him, barking softly like a true companion, grounded in the sacred bond they shared. But as dawn broke over Barnaby's acres, painting the sky in hues of gold and amber, the old farmer knew this night would linger in his mind. He had fought for more than just land. He had fought for love, the love of his home, his animals, and the life he built from the ground up. Old man Barnaby had surprised them, just as he had surprised himself. In the quiet thrum of morning, he found peace again, knowing that bravery can take many forms, and sometimes it rises from the heart of the most unexpected of heroes. The silent night was abruptly shattered by the sharp sound of a single gunshot. Echoing through the air, it jolted the stillness of Barnaby's acres, awakening the stars that twinkled expectantly above. Old man Barnaby, his face weathered and stooped from years of labor, stared blankly into the moonlit fields, unable to shake the unease that had settled in his bones. He'd fought against storms, droughts, and labor pains, but this felt different. It all started the evening before, when whispers wrapped themselves around the local tavern like a snake coiling around its prey. The Lost Wolves, a gang infamous for their daring robberies and arrogant swagger, had marked Barnaby's farm as their next target. Barely anyone knew of the hidden fortune tucked away in his barn-prized livestock earnestly nurtured, each animal a legacy of hard work and dedication. The Lost Wolves gathered in the dim light of the tavern, squinting through the smoke that surrounded them. Hank, the leader, was plotting their next move, confidence gleaming in his eyes. That old coot Barnaby doesn't stand a chance. Jake shifted uncomfortably at the edge of his seat, fidgeting with a drink that promised courage but felt heavy with doubt. He asked, glancing nervously around the room. "Armed?" Nick laughed, a malicious spark igniting in his gaze. The men roared with laughter, their bravado painting a picture distorting reality. Each man was drowning in the thrill of their plan, oblivious to the scent of danger lingering just outside the tavern doors. With a dark sense of camaraderie and desperation, they sealed their fate that night, weaving dreams of escape and fortune. As midnight blanketed the farm, the wolves slinked through the overgrown grass, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Under the silver gaze of the moon, Hank clambered toward the farmhouse, determination etched into every furrow on his brow. He'd seen men fight over gold and diamonds, but livestock, that was something they could threat, something the old farmer loved more than anything else. Meanwhile, two shadows slipped to the barn, their destination now imprinted in their minds as a feast for those hungry souls. Each step was deliberate, quiet, each breath synchronized with the soft rustling of leaves, harmonizing with their budding adrenaline. Old man Barnaby, seated in his favorite chair, gradually drifted into slumber. Rusty, his faithful dog, lay at his feet, an undying guardian as Barnaby, unknowing, prepared for the storm that was tumbling toward him. Outside, the lost wolves prowled like predators, savoring the taste of imminent success. Hank made his way to the front of the farmhouse and pounded on the door, laughter simmering on his lips. "Hey, old man." Barnaby jolted awake, instinct kicking in. Familiar sound seemed foreign under this new light of danger. He squinted at the door and grabbed his rifle, a trusted extension of himself, as he made his way cautiously toward the noise. Rusty, now fully alert, let out a low growl, the warning signal of danger. Barnaby demanded, summoning every bit of resolve within him. His heart raced, but he stood tall, refusing to cower in his own home. "Just wanted to have a little chat," Hank replied, feigning nonchalance as he assessed the man before him. What stood out were not Barnaby's aged lines, but the calm fierceness that burned behind his steady gaze. Barnaby retorted, all too aware of the scent of trouble. "You're barking up the wrong tree, gentlemen." As Hank processed the farmer's words, a shiver ran down his spine. He had anticipated easy prey, a man who would quake in fear. But this old man had a fire in his eyes, an indomitable spirit that drew boundaries. Noticing the shift, Barnaby stood firm. But the lost wolves didn't back down easily. They wanted the crown jewels of the farm, the rare livestock known to fetch high prices in the market. "Just step aside, old man. This doesn't have to end badly," Hank replied, his bravado feeble as uncertainty crept in. Barnaby responded, the intensity of his tone rising with each word. He glanced around for any hint of movement from his animals, his heart thumping with the knowledge that they were vulnerable. If they could just keep his attention, they could secure the heist. Suddenly, Jake and Nick sprang into action, crashing through the barn door, and the commotion of bleating sheep filled the air. Barnaby swung around, feeling the urgency spike in his chest. His animals were his life. Before he could catch his breath, Nick pushed open the gates, swiping at sheep with the instinctive cruelty that marked his ambition. He shouted anxiously, adrenaline coursing through him. In that instant, Barnaby's instincts kicked in, the ancestral warrior igniting within him. He roared, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. He would fight for what was rightfully his. All hell broke loose as Rusty barreled toward Nick, summoning the thunderous bark of protection. The dog pounced, teeth snapping inches away from the outlaw's leg. Nick cried, panic seeping through his brash facade as he stumbled back, wrestling to regain control of the reins. Barnaby tightened his grip on the rifle. "You're trespassing and endangering my animals." His life was intertwined with this land once vibrant and growing, now threatened by the shadows of greed. The night held its breath, tension rising like a beast desperate to escape. The air crackled with raw emotion and primal instinct, the farmer against the wolves. Barnaby stepped forward, unwavering, setting the scene against the horizon painted in silver light. Hank shouted defiantly, now sensing the tide shifting against them. The stakes lay heavy in the night, a battle of wills that seemed to stretch beyond the physical realm. The wind swirled and Barnaby took another deep breath, steadying himself. With bold ferocity, he pulled the trigger, a roar echoing through the darkness. The sound sent shockwaves of fear running through the outlaws, causing Jake to release his grip on the struggling sheep. Hank shouted, scrambling backward as the rifle cut the air, a warning shot ricocheting in their minds. The thrill of easy money morphed into something far grimmer. It was a haunting and dire familiarity of danger they had so often worn with pride. At that moment, the bond between Barnaby and his land solidified. Losing nothing but his breath for a second, He realized this was his life, a legacy built on sweat and struggle. The lost wolves were fading into the darkness, their bravado slipping away like sand through fingers. Facing his farm, the animals he raised, the life he created, Barnaby stood, unwavering. He wouldn't allow the echoes of greed to tarnish what he held dear. Rusty barked triumphantly, as if sensing his master's resolve solidifying beneath the flickering light of the moon. As the outlaws fled, their phantom forms dissolving into the night, Barnaby knew he had not just defended his land. He had unleashed a spirit that had been lying dormant. It was more than just a farmer protecting his livelihood. It was a man standing for something greater, a legacy birthed through labor, heart, and soul. In those fleeting moments, he experienced a rush of triumph and relief. The old man had become a figure of strength, and as dawn broke on the horizon, illuminating the fields he called home, hope intertwined with the promise of another day. Looking toward his livestock still trembling in their pens, but safe, Barnaby smiled, breathing in the sense of the earth. What had been a night of chaos had morphed into one of realization. In a world where danger often danced with wealth, it was love that bound him to this land. As the sun peeked over the rising hills, illuminating the scars and stories hidden in the soil, old man Barnaby gripped his rifle tightly, a guardian awakened. This farm wasn't merely a piece of land. It was his heart, and he would always protect it with every ounce of his being, forever ready to stand against those who sought to threaten his legacy. In the darkness of a moonless night, the stillness of Barnaby's acres was shattered by unexpected laughter. Three figures blended into the shadows, eyes glinting with mischief as they surveyed the sprawling farmland. The Lost Wolves, a notorious band of outlaws, were on the prowl once again, their reckless ambition their only guide. Hank, their leader, surveyed the land with greedy eyes. "We hit it big tonight," he whispered, barely containing his excitement. Jake, the youngest of the trio, shifted nervously from foot to foot. "You sure about this? I heard he keeps a shotgun by his door." Nick, rough around the edges with a confidence born of desperation, replied, "Let him catch us. Old Barnaby's just a rustler trying to play hero." They had spent weeks gathering intel, lurking around the tavern and trading stories with anyone who might have a lead. Barnaby had earned his reputation. He cared for rare livestock like they were family, and his animals were worth a small fortune. The sheep were prized for their wool, and the cattle were known to fetch twice the price at market. As the trio crept closer, tension built like a coiled spring, ready to snap at any moment. Barnaby's farmhouse radiated warmth, the soft glow of a lantern spilling out onto the porch where the old man could be seen, dozing in a chair. Rusty, his loyal dog, lay at his feet, a sentinel prepared to protect. The outlaws exchanged glances, clutching their weapons tightly. This was it. They moved, their footsteps muffled by the earth, weaving a plan that seemed foolproof in the dim light. Hank approached the farmhouse with purpose, drawing a deep breath as he banged loudly on the door. "Hey, Barnaby." His voice boomed like thunder, disrupting the serene night. Barnaby awoke with a start, confusion warring with instinct. He glanced at the clock near midnight and grabbed his shotgun, an old yet trusted piece of iron that had seen its share of confrontations. Rusty stood, growling softly, sensing the tension that hung thick in the air. Barnaby's voice cut through the darkness, steadier than he felt. He opened the door just enough for his weathered face to peer out. Hank replied, attempting to mask his own trepidation with bravado, but beneath the bravado his heart raced. Barnaby shot back, his keen eyes catching glimpses of the figures lurking in the shadows. Jake and Nick, now behind Barnaby's home, were readying themselves. They knew they only had a moment before the old man would realize they were not merely local well-wishers. They intended to grab what they came for, but they also understood that Barnaby was no ordinary farmer. He had labor and love woven into every inch of his land. Back at the door, Hank pushed. "Why don't you step aside, old man?" Barnaby's heart pounded, but he stood firm. "You're not welcome here." Rusty, now more alert than ever, stepped forward, barking ferociously. The old dog sensed that something was awry and bristled with determination. Barnaby placed a steady hand on Rusty's back, his presence grounding the moment. Hank shot back, irritation creeping into his voice. "Think what you like," Barnaby answered, his resolve crystal clear. With that, Hank exchanged anxious looks with Jake and Nick, their confidence starting to wane in the face of the farmer's unexpected strength. But desperation fueled Hank. He yelled to his comrades, adrenaline pumping. At that moment, Jake and Nick burst through the back of the barn, the door swinging open with a creak that sent the animals into a frenzy. Sheep bleated, startled from their peaceful slumber, and chaos erupted. Barnaby turned sharply, eyes wide with alarm. He had underestimated the speed of their plan, realizing they were desperate enough to sabotage what he loved most. Through the door, Nick frantically grabbed at the sheep, pulling them toward the back, while Jake eyed the stalls for anything of value. Panic mixed with desire, overwhelming common sense as they fumbled through the dim light. Nick yelled, pointing to a prize ram with powerful horns. But their plan unraveled quickly. Barnaby stormed into the barn, shotgun raised, fury burning in his chest. "Get out!" he bellowed, the sound resonating with a power that broke through the chaos. Jake dithered, frozen by shock. He stammered, panic overtaking him. The sight of the old farmer, a man who had fought against all odds, struck fear into their hearts. It was as if the very land had come alive to defend itself. Hank staggered back to rejoin his friends, panic overshadowing their bravado. They hadn't expected Barnaby to confront them so fiercely, to be so resolute. "Forget it!" Hank shouted, but their minds raced, caught between greed and the simplicity of wanting to run. In that instant, Rusty lunged at Nick, teeth bared, growling fiercely. Snapping closer, the dog's presence was electric, a palpable force that seemed to electrify the air. The outlaws were trapped, surrounded. Jake shouted, "What are we doing here?" He pushed Nick, panic evident in his voice, and they turned as one, bolting toward the open door. Barnaby kept his rifle raised, prepared to defend every morsel of his hard-earned legacy. Barnaby bellowed, voice echoing as they fled past him into the cold night. Their escape was chaotic, hitting whatever they could find, tumbling barrels and stray tools littering the ground, creating a path of confusion. When Barnaby stepped out, the darkness enveloped the outlaws, their silhouettes disappearing into the shadows. But chaos lingered. Nick stumbled into a fence, pitchforks sent flying high into the air as the world spun around them. Adrenaline coursed through their veins, but the consequences of stupidity bore down like a heavy weight. Barnaby remained steadfast, watching as they dashed away, their arrogance fizzling into the night. He felt fueled by a wave of triumph mixed with sorrow for those men who'd have to live with their choices. But as the adrenaline faded, fatigue pressed in. Barnaby took a moment, the weight of the world bearing down on him. He looked at the animals, their panic subsiding under his calming presence. Rusty, who had stood guard beside him, let out a soft bark, an affirmation of loyalty. Barnaby stepped forward, reaching for the frightened sheep, whispering words of comfort to remind them of their safety. The world might tumble around them, but here, in this moment, they were home. In the distance, the outlaws fled toward the neighboring woods. Their disregard for danger stripped away like bark from a tree, exposing the raw nerves beneath. Hank turned back for one last look, catching a glimpse of the old farmer standing defiantly at the barn entrance, a figure he hadn't anticipated. Nick exclaimed, heart racing with embarrassment and regret. Hank snapped back, frustration bubbling over. "It's more than that," Jake interjected quietly. "He wasn't just a farmer, there was something about him." Hank scoffed, but a flicker of doubt lingered in his eyes. "So what? We're outlaws, that's what we do." The trio, once united by ambition, felt a rift growing, raw and rough along the edges. They stumbled into the woods, shadows bleeding into darkness, hearts caught between the consequences of their choices and the thrill of greed. Back at Barnaby's acres, the farmer gathered himself, breathing deeply as dawn began to break. The first rays of sunlight shimmered through the trees, illuminating the hard-fought life he had built. Every furrow, every seed planted, held a piece of his soul, and tonight had only solidified his resolve. Standing amidst the chaos of scattered hay and panicked sheep, Old Man Barnaby recognized that he wasn't just a farmer. He was a protector of a legacy, a man who would withstand the tides of despair. The bond he shared with his land and livestock was unyielding, and he would rise against whatever storm threatened to tear it apart. With each breath, he felt the heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet, steady and unwavering. and as the sun glowed brighter, casting its warm rays throughout the acreage, Barnaby lifted his chin, grateful for another day. A day to continue his fight, a day to remind himself and the world just how precious what he had truly was. It wasn't just about the threat that had come and gone. It was about the love that would always remain for his land, his animals, and for all that they represented. In the stillness of early morning, with Rusty by his side, the old man knew he had surprised not just the outlaws but himself, finding a strength he didn't know he possessed. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And as the sun crested the horizon, Barnaby smiled, holding close the promise of protection that lay before him. In the quiet heart of that farm, heroes could rise from the most unexpected places, even when faced with the shadows of greed. In the stillness of a crisp autumn night, when the air was thick with anticipation and the moon hung low in the sky, three figures cloaked in shadow approached a distant farm. The flickering lights from the farmhouse hinted at warmth, a stark contrast to the cold intentions swirling among the trio. These were not just any men. They were the lost wolves, notorious outlaws with a reputation as dark as the night. They had a plan, and they weren't about to let an old farmer stop them. "Get it?" Hank whispered, a glimmer of greed igniting his eyes. "That's a fortune waiting for us." Jake, the youngest of the group, shivered as he glanced toward the farmhouse. "What if he's armed? I heard he's not just some bumbling old man." "Yeah, but he's still just one man against three of us," Nick replied, his voice dripping with bravado, a false cloak of courage that masked his own anxiety. "We just create a diversion." Hank crouched lower, each step purposeful like a cat stalking its prey. "First, I make some noise to lure him out. While he's distracted, you two slip in and grab the livestock." As they neared the farmhouse, the tension hung like a thick fog. Barnaby's farm had seen generations of hard work and sweat, yet here they were determined to strip it away in a single night. It was more than just livestock to Barnaby. It was a legacy built on blood and toil, the culmination of every decision he made since he laid roots in the soil. Inside, Barnaby sat in his favorite chair, a patchwork quilt tossed over his legs, the glow from the fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. At 65, he had seen enough storms, both literal and metaphorical, to recognize the signs of trouble. Rusty, his faithful dog, lay curled at his feet, eyes half closed, yet alert to every creak of the house. Suddenly, a loud bang shattered the tranquility. Hank had tossed a rock against the side of the barn, and it echoed through the silent night. Barnaby bolted upright, instinct kicking in. He had spent decades building this life, and he wasn't about to let it collapse now. Barnaby muttered, grabbing his rifle. The familiar weight felt comforting, a silent reminder that he would protect what was rightfully his. Glanced at Rusty, whose growl deepened, a primal warning of the danger approaching. Hank's heart raced with adrenaline, feeling powerful as he called out, "Hey, old man." But even amidst his bravado, a tiny spark of trepidation flickered within him. Was Barnaby really as defenseless as rumors suggested? With a steady hand, Barnaby opened the door just enough to peer out. Hank's voice belied the purpose behind it. He took a step forward, trying to appear unfazed by Barnaby's steely gaze. Barnaby's brow furrowed. "You think I'd make a deal with thieves?" Before Hank could respond, he felt a rush of movement behind him. Jake and Nick had crept toward the barn, urgency fueling their actions. They could hear the animals rustling inside, precious timing slipping away like sand through fingers. "Watch them," Barnaby shouted, adrenaline charging through him like electricity. He didn't wait for a command. He stepped boldly into the night, rifle raised, resolve hardening in his chest. Sight of Barnaby, though older, stood firm, an oak tree rooted firmly in soil, unyielding against the winds. A glint of fear crossed Hank's face as he tried to maintain his bravado, but Barnaby's stance was far more potent than any threat he had faced before. Barnaby commanded, stepping forward as Rusty joined him, barking fiercely. This wasn't just about livelihood, it was personal. His family, his life was tied into every inch of the farm. A flash of hesitation coursed through Hank's mind. Maybe this wasn't a good idea, he thought, but pride held him back. He reminded himself. Panic twisted in his gut as he moved. Barnaby leveled the rifle in their direction, his finger hovering over the trigger. In a chaotic world, Jake slipped into the barn, gripping the first animal he reached, the most valuable sheep he could see. Just as he began to pull it away, Barnaby took a deep breath, focusing on his target. But the other outlaws were already inside, the buzz of greed drowning out the voice of reason. Nick tugged at another sheep, adrenaline skyrocketing, while Hank surveyed the scene, realizing their opportunity was slipping away. Rusty charged into the fray, barking ferociously, teeth showing. The moment became a storm. Screams from the animals mingled with growls from the dog, chaos unraveling like an old yarn. Barnaby rushed inside, determined to defend his home at all costs. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as a crate toppled over, scattering hay and equipment across the floor. Each sound sent tremors through the group, turning desperation into pure chaos. Jake yelled, panic coursing through his veins. In that moment of disarray, Barnaby seized the opportunity. He stepped closer, rifle steady, eyes blazing with fierce determination. "You're going to regret this. Leave my farm and I'll let it slide." Nick stared wide-eyed at the old man facing them. Panic twisted in his throat and he looked to Hank for reassurance. But Hank was already backtracking, realizing the old farmer was far more than just frail. "You hear him. Let's take what we have and get out," Hank stuttered, starting to retreat toward the door, urgency dripping from his voice. Just as they turned, Rusty lunged at Nick, barking fiercely. Nick stumbled back, nearly falling over the spilled crate. He shouted, scrambling to maintain his balance. Seizing the moment, he fired a shot into the air, a warning that sent chills down every spine in the barn. Jake dropped the sheep, fear beating back greed in an instant. They were no longer fearless outlaws. They were cornered animals desperate for escape. Barnaby roared, the force of his voice carrying authority that pierced through the haze of adrenaline. Running for the door, they stumbled over barrels and livestock, chaos spinning around them. Fear propelled them forward, the stench of surrender heavy in the air. The trio burst into the night, shadows retreating into the woods, each step a frantic escape from the reality they had created. Breathing heavily, Jake glanced back over his shoulder, heart racing. He gasped. But silence fell among them, the weight of their choices crushing any thoughts of future plunder. They had no one to blame but themselves. Each of them felt defeat hung heavy in the air, the hum of adrenaline now replaced by the noise of harsh reality. Back at the barn, Barnaby lowered his rifle, breathless yet victorious. He let out a long sigh, realizing he had faced not mere thieves but the ghosts of what greed could create. With Rusty by his side, he took a moment to reflect. This wasn't just a simple confrontation. It was a reminder of what was truly valuable. The animals, though startled, began to settle down. Barnaby moved cautiously through the barn, murmuring soft reassurances to his sheep as he reassured himself. He was their shepherd, their protector, and his bond with each animal ran deep as the soil from which they sprang. With dawn creeping upon them, Barnaby stepped back outside, a wave of relief washing over him. The air felt fresh, invigorated by the promise of a new day. In the back of his mind, he knew those outlaws would be back, desperate to score big from a life they had not earned. But he also understood something more profound. It wasn't just about defending against danger. It was about standing firm against the tides of greed and betrayal that threatened to wash away not just his farm, but everything he loved. Barnaby stood under the soft glow of the early morning light, a silhouette against a brightening sky. He might be an old man, but the spark within him had ignited anew. It was a reminder that life wouldn't break him. He had wrestled with the forces beyond his control before and emerged resilient. He would do so again. In that moment, determination infused his very being. Barnaby grinned at Rusty, who barked in response, as if understanding the silent pledge they had made to each other. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them head-on, united in their unbreakable bond. Later, as the sun rose higher, casting rays of warmth over the land he loved dearly, Barnaby felt invigorated. He had come out of that night with something powerful, not just the knowledge that he could defend his home, but the realization that he would always fight for what mattered most. His life, like the rich soil beneath his feet, would endure. There would always be shadows, but as long as he stood tall, the dawn would always bring light and possibility. With each step forward into another day, Barnaby embraced the challenge. He vowed to make his home even stronger, to ensure that the love embedded in the earth would always remain unyielding. The true battle was not with the outlaws, but within a continuous fight against doubt and fear, standing proud in the face of adversity. He was Barnaby, keeper of the land, and no one would take that from him. Under the cover of darkness, the air crackled with anticipation as three figures moved stealthily through the overgrown grass toward Barnaby's acres. The moon cast an eerie glow over the landscape, illuminating the crooked barn and the cozy farmhouse nestled against the hills. For Hank, the leader of this motley crew of outlaws, the night was full of promise. They were on the verge of stealing something they believed would set them up for life: Barnaby's prized livestock. "Look at it," Hank whispered, a feverish excitement lightening his voice. "Those sheep are worth a fortune." Jake, the youngest of the group, looked nervously at the dark farmhouse. "Are you sure he won't be armed?" "Please," Nick scoffed, rolling his eyes. "What's an old man going to do against three of us?" Their plan was deceptively simple: create a distraction, draw Barnaby out, and while he was busy defending his home, Jake and Nick would slip in to snag the livestock. They had gathered information over the better part of a month, eavesdropping at the tavern and exchanging whispers with locals who underestimated the farmer. As they neared the farmhouse, Hank felt a pang of doubt. Would this really be as easy as they'd planned? But greed washed over him like a flood. "We just need to stick together," he said, shoving his doubts aside. With hearts pounding, they positioned themselves for the night's challenge. Hank crept toward the old farmhouse and hurled a stone against the side of the barn, letting out a shout. "Hey Barnaby, come out here." Inside, Barnaby jolted awake, his instincts kicking in as he sat straight up in his armchair. The warmth of his cozy home faded as reality dawned on him. He glanced at the clock: midnight, and his grip tightened around the shotgun resting against the wall. Rusty, his loyal dog, stirred at his feet, sensing the shift in the air. Barnaby bellowed, his voice steady as he moved toward the door. He had fought too hard for this land to let anyone threaten him. Hank shouted, trying to mask his nerves with bravado. His heart raced as he caught a glimpse of Barnaby's silhouette, strong and unyielding, framed by the flickering light from within. "You've got 5 seconds to get off my land before I come out there," Barnaby replied, now standing on the porch, rifle ready. Hank felt a chill race down his spine but didn't let it show. "You think you can scare us off with a gun?" Barnaby stepped farther into the light, his weathered face etched with years of hard work. "I've faced storms, droughts, and wild animals." As if on cue, the other two outlaws took off toward the barn, hearts pounding with the thrill of the chase, eager and reckless. The plan was falling into place, but the reality of what they were doing began to gnaw at Jake. "Maybe we shouldn't be doing this," he mumbled, glancing back toward the farmhouse. He felt an instinctive pull to turn back to find safety in the normalcy of his life. "Shut it, Jake." Nick snapped, annoyance creeping into his voice. "We're doing this." With that, they pushed open the barn doors, and the internal noise of bleating sheep cascaded out, mingling with their quickened breaths. But their excitement soon turned to dread. Barnaby shot out of the farmhouse, raising his rifle as Rusty barked fiercely beside him. Barnaby shouted, eyes blazing with fierce determination. They could sense his resolve like an electric current crackling in the air. Nick stumbled back, realizing the weight of the moment. Fear twisted in his gut as he looked to the leader for direction. "Just grab something," Hank shouted, uncertainty creeping into his tone as he realized they had gone too far. Jake hesitated, his hands shaking. "Wait." Barnaby charged forward, the rifle steady, a guardian of what he had built. His voice vibrated with power. It was a standoff, outlaws facing an old man who was unyielding and fierce with the spirit of those who had come before him. They hadn't anticipated this kind of resistance. Hank yelled, desperation setting in. But Barnaby stood firm, embodying the strength born from years of toil. Rusty followed his lead, stalking menacingly at the intruders, a guardian determined to defend his realm. Jake cried out as panic rippled through the group. Then, in a chaos of frustration and decision-making, Barnaby fired a warning shot into the air. The blast echoed through the night, and the trio froze, the sound silencing their frantic breaths. In that instant, the atmosphere shifted. The air turned thick with weight. and Jake thought he could feel the pulse of fear radiating from Hank. Hank ordered, his voice dripping with both authority and fear. In a frantic scramble, they bolted from the barn, the shouts of Barnaby chasing them like shadows. Each man felt the pull of escaped freedom clawing at their heels as they stumbled away, fear igniting their limbs. The thrill of theft extinguished in the face of reality. What they were stealing wasn't just livestock. It was a way of life that Barnaby had fought hard to protect. Amid their chaotic retreat, Nick stumbled over a barrel, crashing to the ground. "Come on," he yelled, panic surging through him. Hank turned back, realizing they were losing time. Barnaby was formidable, standing tall against them, but in that moment of vulnerability, Hank felt the pulse of panic rise. "Just leave it," he yelled to Nick, who was scrambling to his feet. Jake, streaking through the night air, felt a rush of clarity mixed with terror. He shouted, running faster, propelled by the weight of their choices crashing down like a wave. Behind them, Barnaby remained composed, focused on the path ahead. His heart was racing, not with fear but with a fierce sense of purpose. He had stood against many storms in his life, and tonight was no different. He would protect his legacy. As they burst into the stillness of the woods surrounding the farm, the lost wolves realized they were more than just men running away from a confrontation. They were fugitives now, a sense of defeat washing over them as they understood how far they had strayed from their original intentions. Jake leaned against a tree, gasping for breath. His eyes darted nervously as the reality settled in. Hank's bravado cracked. We regroup." But his voice faltered, each word heavy with realization that what they were attempting had been foolish from the start. Hours passed before the men found refuge in the shadows. They warmed themselves around a makeshift fire, but the light could not chase away the chilly dread that wrapped around them like a vice. Their grand plan had turned into a bitter failure, and beneath the stars, they were plagued by doubt. Nick murmured, shivering as the woods rustled against the chill of the night air. "Let him try," Hank snapped, though uncertainty laced his tone. The reality of their situation hit hard. They had gone from outlaws with a plan to hunted men in a foreign wilderness. As dawn approached, he reflected on the choices that had led them here. The thought of Barnaby standing up against them, the fierceness in his eyes, haunted Hank like a ghost. Hank murmured, addressing the shadows around the fire. "No," Jake replied, a bitter edge to his voice as he stared into the flames. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Barnaby breathed in the fresh air, his heart finally settling. Rusty barked softly beside him, sensing the calm returning. Barnaby felt the light of a new day breaking through, illuminating the beauty of the land he cherished. With determination, he set about securing the barn doors, checking on his livestock to ensure their safety. The old man had faced the night's chaos but emerged with a fierce sense of pride swelling in his chest. "I won't let fear dictate my life," he muttered, his voice steady as he stroked the side of Rusty's head. He was resolute that this land was not just his home, it was a part of him. No amount of danger could take that away. Days turned into weeks, the world around Barnaby returning to the rhythm of its natural life. The sheep grazed peacefully on the grass, and the warm sun hung high in the sky as the seasons shifted. Barnaby cherished each day as a lesson learned, standing taller and more aware of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Hank, Jake, and Nick, on the other hand, found themselves stuck in a cycle of shame and regret. Each time they proposed a heist, memories of Barnaby's unwavering strength stung their pride, turning their dreams of a big score into nothing but ghosts of what could have been. As they roamed the outskirts of town, a quiet realization dawned on them. They could continue living as they were, but they were surviving by shadows. Each new plan they tried felt weak and hollow. The thrill had vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of regret that no heist could ever fill. One night, as they sat around a fire much like the one from weeks earlier, Hank broke the silence. He suggested, his voice barely a whisper. Nick exclaimed, fear creeping into his voice. Hank pressed, his eyes glimmering with desperation. Jake sat upright, finally daring to voice the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind. What if we do go back, not to steal but to apologize? In the shadows of doubt, a flicker of hope ignited within Hank. Perhaps this was the path to redemption, a way to heal the wounds of greed. And so they put their heads together, devising a plan not of theft but of humility. A few days later, they approached Barnaby's acres, hearts racing as they neared the familiar farmhouse. The fear they felt was palpable, mixed with the hope that perhaps they could find forgiveness. Barnaby was outside, tending to his crops, when the trio crept up. Seeing them, he straightened up, caution in his eyes but also something else, curiosity. He asked, his voice unwavering yet laced with the wisdom that comes from experience. Hank stepped forward, swallowing hard. "We came to say we're sorry. What we did was wrong." Barnaby studied them, the steadfast nature that had seen countless storms reflected in his gaze. He could sense their sincerity, but he wasn't one to let down his guard easily. "Words mean little without actions to back them up," he replied, keeping his tone measured. Jake interjected, "We want to help you. We can work here, earn your trust back." After a long pause, Barnaby's heart softened. He had fought many battles in his life, and each time he had come out stronger. Forgiveness, though, was a different battle, one he was willing to fight. "All right," he said slowly, the corners of his mouth lifting gently. With that, the lost wolves began a new chapter. They worked alongside Barnaby, taking on the hard labor of the farm. Collecting eggs, mending fences, herding livestock, they learned the value of hard work and humility, life lessons they never would have expected. Day by day, they forged a bond with Barnaby, learning to respect what he had built with his own hands. Events they once saw as obstacles, they now found joy in. Planting seeds, feeding the animals, sharing stories by the fire at dusk. Under Barnaby's watchful gaze, the Outlaws began to transform. Reality settled in. The thrill of crime was nothing compared to the satisfaction of building something worthwhile, something they could be proud of. And as time slipped by, the moments they once dreaded turned into moments they cherished. The sun cast golden rays over the fields, illuminating the beauty of a life reclaimed. Barnaby had surprised them in ways they had never imagined, and in doing so, taught them the invaluable lessons of forgiveness, strength, and redemption. Years later, Barnaby would tell the tale of the night the Outlaws came to his farm. He would speak not of fear, but of the power of understanding and the resilience within us all. Those men, who once sought to take everything he valued, found a way to build upon the very ground they had once intended to steal from him. In the heart of that farm, he learned that even the hardest souls could change course, that compassion often triumphs over darkness. The old farmer stood tall, a testament to what it meant to fight for one's life, not just against threats, but for the chance to offer others a path to find their way home. The wind howled like a beast as a thick fog rolled in, casting a cloak of mystery over the farmland. Barnaby's acres lay nestled in the heart of the countryside, a seemingly quiet haven where the hustle and bustle of the world outside faded away. But tonight, secrets whispered through the shadows, carrying the promise of upheaval. 3 outlaws crept along the edge of the property, their boots silent against the earth as they approached the old wooden barn. "This is it," Hank, the group's leader, declared, his voice low but charged with excitement. Jake, the youngest member, shivered, pulling his coat tighter around him. He could feel the weight of something dark hanging in the air, a feeling that gnawed at his gut. "Stop being a coward," Nick scoffed, pushing forward, driven by the thrill of danger. "We've planned this for weeks." Hank felt the adrenaline course through him, a heady mix of fear and excitement. This would be their biggest haul yet. Barnaby had a reputation for breeding top-tier livestock animals worth more than gold on the black market. And tonight, under the veil of secrecy and quiet tension, they would take what they believed was rightfully theirs. "I'll make some noise at the farmhouse," Hank instructed. With a nod, they split up, the plan taking shape in the darkness. Hank moved toward the front of the farmhouse, heart racing, while Jake and Nick snuck through the side toward the barn. Barnaby's snug home glowed invitingly in the cold night, an oasis of warmth surrounded by looming shadows. Inside, Barnaby, a grizzled man in his 60s, sat comfortably by the fireplace, a steaming cup of tea cradled in his hands. He had worked this land for decades, each wrinkle on his face telling tales of sweat, heartache, and perseverance. But tonight, the peaceful quiet stirred something in him. It was an instinct born from years of working the land, a sense that something was off. Rusty, his loyal dog, stirred awake, ears perked as he sensed a faint shiver in the air. Barnaby leaned forward, anticipation settling in his gut. He whispered, reaching down to scratch Rusty's ears. Suddenly, a sharp bang echoed outside. Hank had hurled a rock against the side of the farmhouse, doing his best to sound like an intruder. "Hey, Barnaby, wake up, old man." Startled, Barnaby jumped to his feet, the tea spilling from his cup. He reached for his trusty shotgun, an emblem of his resolve. He called out, stepping toward the door. Rusty barked defensively, a fierce protector despite his age. Hank's heart raced, but he pressed on. "Just a little chat, Barnaby." Barnaby shouted, his voice steady and demanding. But the sound of hooves pounding on the earth drowned out Hank's confidence. Jake and Nick were already inside the barn, eyes wide with excitement and fear as they faced rows of precious livestock. The animals stirred, their instincts screaming at them to flee. Nick hissed, moving toward a prized sheep, its thick wool nearly glistening in the dim light of the barn. Outside, Hank felt the tension spike in his chest. One wrong move and their entire plan could implode. The stakes were higher than ever. He called out again, hoping to distract the farmer long enough for his friends to get what they came for. Barnaby adjusted his grip on the shotgun. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Hank shouted as he turned back toward the barn. "You can keep the ones you like, old man." Rusty barked louder, a growl of defiance that shook the air. Barnaby felt hopeful in that moment, the bond between man and dog stronger than ever. He warned, stepping forward. Inside the barn, chaos erupted. Jake stumbled as he tried to grab a struggling sheep. He shouted, panic flooding his voice. Nick snapped back, "Hurry." As they fought to corral the animals, Barnaby pushed the door open wider, rifle at the ready. He stepped into the moonlight, the determination in his stance undeniable. "You boys think you can run my farm?" Hank froze, realizing they were unprepared for this kind of confrontation. He shouted back, though doubt crept into his mind like a dark fog. Instinctively, he could feel Barnaby's fierce resolve radiating across the yard. Barnaby retorted, and as he took a step forward, the unmistakable sound of a shotgun was heard, an echo of certainty that rang true. A shot rang out, reverberating through the night, but it was a warning shot aimed into the air. Fear washed over Hank and the others, recognizing the weight of the moment. "Get out!" Barnaby shouted, the power of his words slicing through the tension like a knife. In that split second, Jake and Nick made a decision. They dashed out of the barn, leaving the sheep behind, eyes wide with panic. Jake yelled, but fear constricted their wills like iron chains. They had jumped into chaos, and now the storm had come for them. Hank turned, desperate to regroup. He cried out, but as he looked back, the defiance of Barnaby stung like ice-cold water splashed in his face. The old man was a wall of fury and protection, and it sent shivers down Hank's spine. Barnaby barked again, marching toward them, a force of nature. His determination surged. This was not just a battle, it was a sacred duty. Hank whipped around and bolted, racing toward the trees. The sound of footsteps pounding the ground echoed behind him, but they didn't dare look back. Fear propelled them, a primal instinct tying them together as they fled into the darkness. Barnaby stood by the barn, heart pounding but full of pride. He watched the figures retreat into the shadows, feeling a flood of relief wash over him. He had faced thieves before, but this was different. They had underestimated what it meant to stand for something. As dawn broke, the sun splashed golden light across the land, illuminating the aftermath of the night's chaos. Barnaby took a deep breath, grounding himself in the familiar scents and sights around him. Rusty sat by his side, panting softly, the feeling of victory palpable in the early morning air. But something nagged at Barnaby's heart. He knew they wouldn't give up so easily. Those outlaws were desperate and hungry. They'd return, and next time they might come with more than just bravado and bad intentions. Meanwhile, the trio of outlaws stumbled through the morning mist, grappling with the reality of their failure. Their dreams of fortune shattered like glass, leaving jagged edges that would cut deep. The woods felt foreign, and fear coiled tightly around their chests. Jake gasped, reflecting on the wild night that had spiraled out of control. Every shadow felt like a specter of their choices. Hank shook his head, trying to dismiss the regret that loomed. I didn't think he'd stand up to us like that." "It's not over," Nick said, a spark of anger flaring in his eyes. "We go back, we plan better." Their beats quickened, hearts fueled by frustration. A plan began to form, a reckless thought that took root like a weed. They would gather their resources, come back stronger, whatever it took. As they made their way deeper into the woods, their resolve crystallized. They would not leave Barnaby's acres unscathed. The stakes were now personal. Back at Barnaby's farm, preparations were being made. Barnaby understood he had a responsibility to his land and his livestock. The attacks would only get worse, and he had to be ready to defend what was rightfully his. With every sunrise, he felt the urgency rise. He began to fortify the barn, reinforcing doors and planning ways to protect his animals. The threat loomed larger than life, and even the sun rising higher felt like a prelude to an inevitable showdown. As he worked, Rusty stayed by his side, a silent guardian surveying the land. Barnaby felt a bond forming, man and dog, constructor and protector, ready to stand against whatever the world threw at them. But shadows lingered in the distance, whispering deceit. The outlaws plotted in the woods, stoking the fires of revenge as they sharpened their resolve. They began to band together, growing dangerous in their desperation, as fear morphed into a fierce yearning for power and wealth. The sun dipped below the horizon once more, casting elongated shadows that whispered of coming chaos. Barnaby paused, a sense of something dark on the wind. Rusty sensed it too, shoulders tense as he padded closer. Little did they know, the next confrontation loomed on the horizon, dark clouds gathering like the brewing storm. In the heart of Barnaby's land, courage and fear would soon clash in a battle neither side could afford to lose. As the darkness descended, and the moon rose high once again, both the farmer and the outlaws knew that a reckoning was coming. The stage was set, and the pieces were in motion, one man's resolve against the shadows of greed, with all the stakes laid bare. Would Barnaby's courage shatter the darkness, or would the outlaws rise from the ashes, taking what they believed was theirs for the taking? The answer waited, poised on a knife's edge, ready to tip into chaos.